It's time to zoom in on the diverse regional realities of progress towards the SDGs to date, as we highlight agents of change and pioneering solutions related to the three prisms of poverty and inequality, climate action, and gender equality.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nour. I'm the director of the UN Regional Commission's New York office, and I will be the moderator of this session. This is, as you all know, it's a breakout session as part of the SDG Action Zone 2020. It comes at the tail of the SDG Moment, where the regional commissions had presented the state of progress on the SDGs in the 5 regions. So today's discussion is an opportunity to complement the story and zoom in with the help of our panelists, which I welcome, on solutions and innovations. We'll be looking for solutions that are emerging at the regional level that can be upscaled and impact the people's lives. We have a diverse group of stakeholders, which I would like to welcome, and I will be moving to introduce them as we move to the conversation one by one for time management. But I'm sure with their expertise, they will be speaking to us today to the diverse regional realities presented in the SDG Moment, and we look forward to hear from them on what can be done to reverse trends in this challenging COVID context as well. So without further ado, let me just explain very quickly that before I move to the conversation with each of the panelists, we will be having a kind of a setting of the stage through a short video of 2 minutes by the head of each of the respective regional economic commissions related to our speakers, following which we'll go through 2 rounds of conversations with our panelists. The first one would be of 3 minutes, and I would urge our panelists, obviously, to heed this time constraint. And then after that, we'll move to a second round of 2 minutes. So without further ado, let me start then to move to our first panelist, which would be Mrs. Yetnebersh Negussie. But before we start to that, let's listen to the video from Vera Songwe, the head of the Economic Commission of Africa.
In the last decade, Africa has made progress in reducing poverty. However, 300 million Africans still live below the poverty line. With COVID, 400 million vulnerable Africans may fall into poverty, and that will see us at about 700 million Africans falling into poverty before the end of the crisis. Africa is in its first recession in 25 years. Governments will need to support the process of getting people out of poverty. We will need to do 2 things. The first, social protection programs. Today on the continent, we spend about $6 billion on social protection programs. We will also need to do job creating programs to ensure that particularly the youth who have fallen into poverty and are more resilient can find jobs for themselves and work their way out of poverty. 90% of Africa's women work in the informal sector, and 70% work on cross-border trading or earn their incomes from cross-border trading. To ensure that these women can continue to be prosperous, one is to give them an identity. Informal economies do not generate prosperity. So finding ways of formalizing their businesses and ensuring that they become fully contributing members of society is going to help achieve gender equality. On cross-border trading, the main and most important element, particularly for women businesses, is to ensure, one, that they have access to financing, but secondly, that we can harmonize processes to ensure that when women trade across borders, Africa has 76 borders, that they meet and confront the same kinds of regulatory environments. With the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and the prospect of harmonizing cross-border trading, we hope that we can move further into gender equality on the continent. Over 3 to 5% of Africa's GDP is lost because of climate change. There are 2 areas where Africa can contribute to the reduction of CO2 emissions. The first is agriculture, the second is energy. In agriculture, 2 policies that we can put in place. The first is reduce extensive agriculture, do more intensive agriculture, but increase productivity, which will increase yields. Add an additional $100 billion to the economy and create 40 million jobs. In energy, Africa today is clearly energy deficient. Over half of our population does not have access to energy. More importantly, industry does not have access to make it competitive and trade globally. Therefore, we will need to produce more energy. Africa has 22,000 megawatts in its national determined contributions. We hope to find financing to do that. That is why Africa is asking for about $100 billion to help it get out of the COVID crisis, and special drawing rights to help ensure that we can continue to finance the private sector to ensure that Africa grows back better from the crisis.
Thank you. So we all saw the video by Vera, and let me start and kick off the discussion, as I said, by Yetnebersh, about really, which is going to focus, as I understand, about the challenge of poverty and inclusion as our first panelist. Yetnebersh is a lawyer and disability rights activist from Ethiopia. Welcome. Currently senior manager of Global Action on Disability. She recently stated that, and you recently stated, Yetnebersh, that a better future is an inclusive one. None of us will be protected unless everyone and every single one of us is protected. I think that's really a compelling statement, but we'd like to hear from you, what concrete solutions or actions that the UN, and in particular in Africa, including the UN Economic Commission of Africa, could undertake with the different stakeholders to transform the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity to build back better towards a more inclusive growth and prosperity. Up to you, Yetnebersh, and welcome.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be part of this distinguished panel. As you rightly said, the COVID-19 experience had shown a great move towards realizing that we are highly interdependent on each other and we are fundamentally interconnected. Mainly, especially coming from a background of human rights, this was the time where humanity was tested. In Africa, of course, a year ago, even nearly 8 and 9 months ago, COVID-19 never seemed a global issue until Africa realized that we have the first person affected by the pandemic on 14th February in Egypt. Now, looking back, it really looked so far from us, but it was not. Unfortunately, the way we dealt with the pandemic has shown us that we were not prepared to respond for crises. And the investments that we have done on our systems in the past were not really done in a manner which prepares us to become more resilient and sustainable. The pandemic left the poor more poorer and the weak more weaker. This was shown by the measures and the policies put to tackle the unprecedented socioeconomic after effects of the pandemic also. For example, economic reforms, which really were introduced by governments to tackle the economic crisis, which was obvious, did not really benefit the most of those who are engaged in the informal employment. As we know, 84% of those engaged in Africa in informal employment are women. And that left quite so many vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities, to die as well as to suffer from the pandemic. The same applies for education. The fact that we saw inclusion in a silo was also another challenge that we have learned, another lesson that we have learned. The ECA estimates that Africa would lose 2.5% of its GDP every month because of the unprecedented socioeconomic effect of the pandemic. This is a huge loss. But the pain is felt at household level. And we have seen also that, it's critical that more marginalized people are being more marginalized than ever because of this pandemic. I would quickly move into the lessons learned and maybe key recommendations that we can draw from that lesson. So because I said we are highly interdependent and we are highly interconnected, the well-being of one person depends on the well-being of the others. So we really need to make sure that our development is designed in a sustainable and inclusive manner. Sustainability is all about intergenerational well-being, and it also takes into consideration what resources and what capitals we have in place. Another critical point that I want to focus on today is data. Most of the African governments, even those with resources, not only African, but also global governments, were not prepared and did not have the right data to protect those mostly vulnerable and marginalized. So they were asking, for example, for social protection support. Quite many of the organizations of persons with disabilities were required to bring data by the government, which is a lame excuse, I would say, because data collection is a duty of governments. Last but not least, I would say that understanding inclusion would need really to have a systematic approach. And governments, we have seen embedding inclusion as part of their system, have better responded to the crisis, to the pandemic in a better inclusive way than the others. This is really important to learn, and as we can really anticipate, the pandemic can be transformed into an opportunity to build back better. By saying so, it's important to realize that inclusion needs to be embedded as part of the system, not as an add-on, not as an addition to something that we want to pursue. It's a challenge that the SDGs are falling off the radar of the people because of the pandemic. But I would say that this is a great, great opportunity for the world to realize that by leaving someone behind, we cannot reach where we want to reach. And if we really talk about a better future, it should be an inclusive one, which really recognizes that inclusion to become not an advocacy, but an implementation through innovation.
Thank you.
Inclusion
Thank you.
become more a necessity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yetnebersh. I mean, really a very strong message and key messages also for the way forward on some policy aspects that needs to be retained if we were to recover and build back better from the COVID-19. I mean, the issue of sustainability and inclusion moving forward is key. And this is what is the SDG Moment is all about. I mean, for those who have followed it as well, these were compelling messages coming from the SDG Moment. The issue of the data is critical. And I think you raised it very well in terms of its essentiality to really target the vulnerable population. And it's not a luxury anymore, but it's really in shaping the policy and having a targeted approach to the vulnerable population and so on. And of course, having the inclusivity as a built-in in a systematic approach is key as well. So thank you for this. We'll move now to another region, Latin America and the Caribbean, which is really defined largely by inequality. And before we hear from our panelists, let's see the 2-minute video from Alicia Barcena, the head of the ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Inequality defines Latin America and the Caribbean. Wealth, income, social protection, education, knowledge, and skills are in the hands of the few. Progress made on eradicating poverty have been set back more than a decade in a matter of months. ECLAC estimates a GDP contraction of -9.1%, with the rise of poverty up to 231 million and 96 million in extreme poverty. Governments have provided emergency basic income to the poor and tax exemptions and grace periods to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. ECLAC proposes to extend these measures for 9 months. We also propose a basic digital basket comprising a laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, and low-cost connectivity for households without internet. We need a political fiscal compact to ensure universal social protection. Women are worse off than men in terms of discrimination, political exclusion, and lack of economic autonomy. Violence against women and girls is the tragedy of inequality exacerbated in these pandemics. The crisis is affecting women more severely as they account for more than 60% of informal labor, and confinement is placing additional pressure as primary caregivers, paid and unpaid. Women are on the front line of the response to the health crisis and are more exposed. They account for 72% of those employed in the health sector. Public care systems are being considered by the region, based on examples of Uruguay and Costa Rica, to open labor options for women. The region has performed well in equal education for women, which in fact reaches tertiary education more broadly than men. However, there is a need to improve their economic autonomy through access to high-quality jobs, equal pay, and financial inclusion. In Latin America and the Caribbean, building back better means reshaping development with equality and sustainability.
Thank you very much. Philipp, we are still on the question of inequality and poverty. Philipp is the director of CEPEI, a think tank located in Bogota, Colombia, that promotes dialogue and multi-stakeholder participation in global agendas on sustainable development and analyzes what countries are doing to move towards sustainable development. Good to have you, Philipp. And as I said, we work together, and it was a pleasure to work together. But let me say, what can civil society organizations contribute to address poverty and inequality, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, good morning, Amre, and I hope you can hear me fine this time. And going concretely to your question, what can civil society do? And I believe we have to go back to basics. First of all, we have to create really multi-stakeholder approaches where the different stakeholders bring together their expertise. And I believe we can do that in seeing how technology can play a role in all this. And I believe this has to be ensured and done in a transparent and very results-orientated way. I mean, we don't have the luxury now on not being driving sustainability into concrete actions and drive these principles, I believe, into environments where transparency, effectiveness, collaboration, but mainly a role. And I believe that civil society, by doing so, can give a voice in reopening the pathways in the countries of the global south, or I would say globally, to be more fair, open up the dialogue through data. We have heard several colleagues of ours talking about data, and I believe data and evidence, it's an open door in order to create dialogue and also to create trust. And by doing so, civil society can track resources, for example, can provide analysis, which we are doing as a think tank community, as the NGO community, as grassroots movements that are really doing interesting analysis and having access to that missing privileged information where official statistics sometimes cannot go and civil society can close that gap. And I would say it is shining a spotlight, Amir and colleagues, on the immediate needs and the response strategies on how to interact, and especially on the pre-existing vulnerabilities. And I would say, and ending up here, your question, it is at the end provide better information on impact to all involved stakeholders. That's what we need to see because we're getting a lot of numbers out here through the day, but not a lot that makes sense and are helping policymakers to make decisions that are based on that evidence that I have yesterday.
Philipp, thank you very much for these messages, and again for reminding us and coming back to the message of data and evidence that we heard also from previous speakers, not only for targeted policy responses, but also for compelling arguments about inclusive and equality and the dividends that the whole society can collect from this, and also for reminding us that it's not only anymore about governments, it's about the whole society and the whole people and the whole stakeholders' involvement if we are to move and change and achieve all these systemic changes, whether in the economic system, financial system, social systems. I think we need the engagement of everybody. And this is not only going to come, certainly probably not going to come from the governments, but it will come probably from a bottom up, from the society, and of course the role of the non-governmental organizations, the private sector, the academia, the think tank, the private sector. All this will have to come together to drive these systemic changes that we are trying to strive for. So thank you very much, Philipp. Let's now move to another region, the Arab region. And also move a little bit to another prism, if I may, which is about the gender equality. Before we hear and we engage with Salma, let's listen and see the video by Rola Dashti, the head of ESQA, the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, which is covering the Arab region.
Before COVID-19, the Arab region had already seen the only increase in extreme poverty globally. The pandemic has pushed an additional 14 million people into poverty, and conflict has left 55 million in need of humanitarian assistance. The region has allocated about $100 billion, but lacks an additional 70 billion in liquidity to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. Arab countries have adopted the Arab multidimensional poverty framework, but they still need to adopt inclusive social protection systems that are financially sustainable, systems that are catalysts for upward mobility. The Arab region is one of the most unequal in the world. 37 billionaires own as much as bottom half of its adult population. Creating national solidarity funds that connect the wealthiest with the poorest is an innovative policy measure to alleviate poverty and reduce inequality. Shared responsibility and societal solidarity is what the region needs. Throughout the world, women are more at risk of falling into poverty and suffer from inequality. Women across Arab countries are making great strides in society and the economy. Yet, the region has the highest level of female unemployment globally and one of the lowest levels of political participation. Violence against women is on the rise and costs the region an estimated $245 billion. Arab countries should focus more on empowering women economically, continue to do away with social discrimination policies, and create opportunities for them. Embracing technology and creating enabling platforms that support, fund, and scale up businesses powered by women is key. Incentive measures are also needed to link women's small businesses to the region's top businesses through integrated value chains. Investing in women is critical to achieve stable, just, and prosperous Arab societies.
All right. So now let's move to Salma. And again, I move to Salma Nims. Dr. Nims is Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women. She has 20 years experience in the area of gender and development and has been an activist for women's rights since the early 1990s. Salma, we just heard Rora Dashti state that both laws as well as social norms are discriminatory and action has to be on multiple fronts. From your experience working on these issues in the Arab region, what are the most influential strategies to accelerate social change and gender equality? What would you say is working and what needs to be improved?
Our preparation for our report, the Beijing Plus 25, was a case in action in realizing this issue of the interrelation between social norms, legislations, and I will add to that institutional practices and how they work together to reinforce discrimination and inequality. And basically, I thank ESCWA because they supported us in our preparation for the Beijing, which was followed up with our broad consultations in the preparation of the National Women's Strategy. And the thing that we realized through our broad consultations all over Jordan, something that came in common from the different areas of Jordan, rich, poor, different regions, is that there are social attitudes typical that are recreating the problem, whereby even if you change laws, sometimes practices continue. And you find that these social attitudes are also ingrained in institutions that are implementing some of the laws or are implementing procedures that sometimes the biases themselves are infecting implementation. That's why I would start from the strategic level. In Jordan, our national women's strategy was endorsed just before the lockdown, and it had two very important pillars as goals, in addition to the usual thematic pillars. We always have thematic pillars relating to economic empowerment, political empowerment, but we always forget that we end up after all this investments that no transformative change has happened because we did not work on the positive gender norms and attitudes in creating and in sustaining gender equality and women empowerment. And on the other side is to have institutions that are implementing, sustaining policies, structures, and services that support gender equality and women empowerment. And I will agree with our colleague from Africa that the data is very important. We noticed and we learned from the situation of COVID in Jordan as well, that the vulnerability markers, if they're not taken into consideration, if the data is not available, then the response will be flawed. So now in our strategies and in the national strategy, we had within the institutional goal, there is focus on the production of data, on gender mainstreaming within. I will reinforce that we still need to work on the institutional frameworks to ensure they're gender mainstream, to ensure the partnerships between public, private, and civil society organization. And on the side of the social norms, which we already started working on, we need to not to go into a confrontational, in our case, in the Arab world, issues like child marriage, for example. We could change the law, but not change the practice. So now we are working on campaigns and efforts with institutions, Sharia law, for example, with the Sharia judges, working in a positive manner. How to reinforce positive, for example, masculinity practices and identity. How do we work with the Sharia judges themselves, that although the law allows them to use the exception for marriage, child marriage, which we are expecting under the COVID situation to sadly increase because of poverty, how to work with them to minimize the exception. So it is about actually moving in a positive approach to change, talking to those who are impacting practices rather than just focusing on one side of the coin and leaving the other.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Salma, for this great presentation, and also for reminding us all that while laws and legislations are important, it's all about societal change and incremental societal change, because societies doesn't change sometimes in an abrupt manner, and maybe sometimes they also kind of push back towards any sometimes abrupt things. So I think this positive and constructive approach of engaging positively to change this societal attitudes are key also. And the manner how this is done in the Arab world and in Jordan is obviously, it's a way forward probably for in a lot of countries and other regions as well. So thank you for this. Now let's move to the Asia and the Pacific region, from which we have with us Mrs. Durreen Shahnaz, and Durreen will come back to you, as I said, but let's listen first to the video of Armida Al-Shabana, who is the head of ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission in the Asia and the Pacific.
Asia and the Pacific is a development success story. 80% of the extreme poor were lifted out of poverty by 2015. And yet, Asia and the Pacific is still characterized by increasing inequality and high levels of informal labor. 60% of the population is not covered by social protection. 40% have no access to health care. This ingrained inequality has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Inclusive social protection policies and bringing the furthest behind to the forefront. This is our way forward. Rising to the challenge of gender inequality makes the commitment of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action ever more important. We are witnessing this momentum of change in the Asia-Pacific, lifting their barriers to political participation and leadership, ensuring women's economic empowerment and integration into formal economy, developing gender-responsive and inclusive social protection, and ending violence against women and girls. When it comes to climate and environment, our region needs acceleration across the board. It means moving towards decarbonization by 2050, a rapid end to fossil fuel subsidies and new investment in coal, tackling air pollution, transforming to green and smart infrastructure and transport, investing in new technology and big data to prepare and respond better to disasters, conserving and protecting our oceans. Part of this transformation have started to take shape. Countries are working on their national roadmap for SDG 7, increasing the share of renewable energy in their energy mix, switching to the use of clean cooking fuels, strengthening regional cooperation for sustainable oceans.
Thank you. So again, Durreen, welcome. Durreen is the founder and CEO of Impact Investment Xchange, and a global leader on social impact and impact investing. Durreen, your company, the Impact Investment Xchange, is a leader in developing innovative financing and developing technology-driven solutions to tackle gender issues and climate challenges. And I think it's an interesting link. Can you tell us more about your solutions and the impact that they are having on women?
Absolutely. Thank you, Amar, and good morning to everyone. It is really an incredible honor to be part of this panel and discuss this very critical issues. And in my case, really talking about how to make finance be inclusive and really make it work for women, underserved communities, and the climate. It's very important for us to remember that 70% of women live in poverty, and this is a global number, and they're disproportionately affected by extreme weathers, loss of agriculture, destruction of life and property. Now, of course, with COVID, all of this has been exacerbated. Now, speaking of Asia, pre-COVID, there were over 736 million people who lived below the poverty line. And that number, of course, has now gone over 1 billion. Now, keeping all these aside, if you just even took the women and if you put all these women back to the workforce and actually help them create livelihood, immediately that would add $28 trillion to the global GDP. And we won't have a scramble to try to meet the SDG goals. Now, interestingly, during this critical time, the world is waking up to the importance of the sustainability dividend. And you can see in the market, flooded by green and social bonds that claim to be responding to the climate change and COVID-19 pandemic. But really, how green are they and how social are they? And are they inclusive at all? And these are the questions that we need to have the courage to ask. The need of the hour is not only to respond to the pandemic, but also to create long-term COVID resilience by building back better and stronger financial systems that have the capacity and the ability to overcome future crises of this scale. Now, at IIX, we have done many interesting, innovative platforms and products, but one of them that I would like to highlight is the Women's Livelihood Bond. And IIX made history and transformed how the financial system works through innovative financial products like Women's Livelihood Bond, which is a $150 million series. And it's the world's first gender lens social bond listed on a stock exchange, reporting social and financial return with direct social input from the beneficiaries. The series is creating sustainable livelihood for over 3 million women across Asia Pacific and unlocking 12 out of the 17 SDGs, including SDG 13, climate action, and SDG 5, gender equality. And we have won numerous awards for this series of bond, and including the UN Global Action Award and the Multilateral Partnering for Green Growth Award. And why is that? It's because through Women's Livelihood Bond, we have proven that not only the ones who have successfully created a gender lens and green financial instrument, but the two can come together. Because you cannot have financial climate action without women as a part of the solution. And of course, the financial system embracing it. And interestingly, if you think about it, amid this global crisis and the pandemic, the bonds actually have been performing absolutely fine and giving the coupons. And I always say, why is that? When the financial markets are basically melting except for the tech stock. It really is because we are working on the ground level with the women and they have no choice, but the economy does continue to grow there. So we need to be able to make finance work for all these women, make it work for climate action, and so that two can go hand in hand.
Thank you. Great, Durreen. Great. And thank you very much. Compelling messages and really evidence-based messages as well. And you reminded us all again of the importance of inclusiveness in the financial system, or in a new financial system that we are seeking, which is not only green, but also has to be inclusive so that the winners don't continue to be the winners from the same financial system, even if it's green, but also to exactly, but to be inclusive, and also the gender dimension and the empowerment of women in that aspect, and the dividends that the economy can get from that. So thank you very much for this, and I think it's, as I say, it's refreshing to hear this coming from the Asia Pacific, that and to benefit other regions as well. Now moving again to the another region to continue the story of the climate change. And I think this time really we're having, a youth perspective from Europe, a gender and youth perspective from Rosalyn Old. But before we listen to you, Rosalyn, let's hear a message from Olga Algairova, who is the head of the UNECE, the UN Economic Commission for Europe.
The UNECE region needs to accelerate progress if it is to achieve the targets of the 2030 Agenda. One critical area is climate change. Today, the UNECE region generates some 40% of GDP, but only 1/3 of global CO2 emissions. This shows the region has made some progress towards decarbonizing its economy, but much more has to be done. The region must further reduce energy use. Buildings' energy needs produce 40% of CO2 emissions. Improving buildings' energy efficiency can deliver massive climate gains and create millions of jobs. UNECE guidelines can support these efforts. Countries must also reduce their dependence on fossil fuels and accelerate investments in renewables and low-carbon technologies. To get there, recovery packages must mobilize investments for the future, fully aligned with the green transformation needed to address the climate crisis. As we enter the last 10 years to deliver on the SDGs, I invite all governments to work with us in this direction and to make the circular economy a reality. We also need solidarity across the region because the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated persistent inequalities with a disproportionate impact on women. Decades of progress on the empowerment of women are at risk unless we act now. Coming out from this pandemic cleaner, greener, and more resilient will require immense political will. The 2030 Agenda must be the blueprint for our collective action.
Thank you. Now, Rosalyn, as we saw in the video, the UNECE region is not on track to reach the targets on climate change. The region with its advanced economies and high standards of living is a major contributor actually to the climate change. Rosalyn Old is a board member of the European Youth Forum, where she focuses on sustainable development, climate change, and supporting youth delegates in these spaces. Rosalyn, in a time when public attention is very much directed at the COVID-19 pandemic, how important is climate change and climate action for you as a youth representative? And what can we do really to keep the focus on that moving forward in the recovery? Up to you, Rosalyn, and welcome again.
Thank you. So the climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, and it's unfortunate that the climate crisis doesn't get half of the media attention that COVID-19 pandemic is at the moment. But both of these crises can't be separated, so they are interlinked both in their causes and also in their effects. So on the effects, the virus can be contracted from and by the rich and the poor indiscriminately, but people who are already living in poverty, as we've already heard, are disproportionately suffering. And the same is true for the climate crisis. It's already affecting millions of people worldwide. And in Europe, we often look at the climate crisis as something that's a threat in the future. But for many people around the world, especially in the global south, climate change is a bitter reality already. And on the causes, the service industry workers will be forced to continue putting themselves at risk in order to pay their bills. And to eliminate the pressures that force people into such dangerous decisions, we would have to do away with the systems that create this drastic inequality in the first place. And precisely the system, so our global economic system, that is the root cause of the climate crisis. We're overproducing, especially in Europe and the wider UNECE region. So to tackle these crises, both the climate crisis and the economic crisis, we need to come together and we need to let go of our economic growth model, or in the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans' words, an untenable economic model relying on the over-increasing use of a dwindling set of resources. So this is our collective task, especially in the global north, to use COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to design an economic system that's not based on growth. This is our only chance because it's scientifically established. And here I'm going to quote the European Economic Agency that says, Europe will not achieve its sustainability vision of living well within the limits of our planet simply by promoting economic growth and seeking to manage the harmful side effects with environmental and social policy tools. So we need to spell out the problem clearly, such as the Vice President and the European Environmental Agency, otherwise we'll always miss the mark. Climate action means economic system change, and young people who will have to live with the consequences of our inaction now must be at the forefront of designing that new system. It's our future and it's our right.
Thank you, Rosalyn. Thank you. Great messages again coming from the youth, as usual. And you reminded us of the ongoing discussion, which is still ongoing for a long, long time, about the imperative to change the consumption and production patterns. But more importantly, as you said, and as we heard from all our previous speakers as well, like Durreen and Salma, really we need a system change, a comprehensive system change, not only economic, but financial and also social. So really, I think we really need, if you wish, to look to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development and really change them systematically and more profoundly than we are used to if we were to recover better. So thank you very much. And also, change from a growth-based kind of economic system really to have at the heart the well-being of the people, and for that look to the quality of the growth and the inclusiveness of the growth. Thank you very much, Rosalyn, for all these messages. So thank you again for this really excellent messages during our first round. Allow me now to follow on some of the issues that came during the second round, and to remind you that we only have maybe 1.5 to 2 minutes for the second round for each of you. Someone has to be the timekeeper, so forgive me for that. But then I'd like to go back to Yetnebersh again. And she made a compelling case really for the inclusiveness, all right? I like really to touch on one aspect for one of the vulnerable population, if you allow me on that. And this is related really to one of the most, I would say, we hope that it would be one of the most successful normative work that came up from the UN. And this is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which really is a guiding framework in implementing the SDGs with regard to inclusion. And I would really like to go to Yetnebersh to get from her some insights about what actions in line with this convention can be strengthened or scaled up in her view to make the convention more of a success story and a lever for accelerated implementation of the SDGs, and why really moving with this convention is key in the recovery from COVID-19 as well. Yetnebersh?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very critical to mention that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is not only a human rights tool, but also a humanitarian rights tool, as the convention also states in its Article 11 that persons with disabilities also need to be protected during situation of risks and humanitarian crisis. As you rightly put it out, the convention spells out obligations for governments to meet both in normal times as well as in crisis pandemic times like this. So as I said, for example, the obligation to collect and avail data is there on Article 31 of the Convention. The same for other rights, including health and education, economic empowerment, and quite a number of them. So for the SDG, as we talk about the holistic approach of development, the convention is a guiding tool to make sure that how no one should be left behind. So obligations remain to become obligations, both in normal times as well as in crisis. As you rightly pointed out, inclusion, if it's built as part of the system and if it is exercised as a norm, then it will be easier for governments to build back better. So the convention is a guarantee which puts that the more than 1 billion persons with disabilities are not left behind, and governments have an obligation to ensure this in accordance with the convention. So I would say that they are complementing each other and also speaking very much clearly in accordance with Article 11 to the humanitarian situation that we are in today.
Thank you, Yetnebersh, for this kind of excellent reminder about the interconnectivity of the SDGs as a broader and global framework to the other frameworks and normative frameworks which exist from the United Nations, and which some of them, of course, are legally binding, some like the conventions and so on. And I think really the SDGs permeates really the life of everybody, including, as we say, the persons with disabilities, but others as well. So thank you very much for reminding us of this kind of great link and important link. So to, again, Rosalyn, all right, and again, you spoke about the need to change the patterns of growth and to really change the whole economic system. And actually, one of the things that I retained from that was exactly what it's about, that to address climate action, action is required, as I said, by many actors, not only the governments, but in addition to the governments, the consumer, the business, the NGOs, the scientists. In your view, what exactly needs to happen to make progress on climate, and what role can young people play in this regard? You are really at the forefront of this issue. It's an intergenerational issue, and I think really we'd like to hear from you about that. Rosalyn.
Thank you. Absolutely. As you say, action is definitely needed from a whole range of different actors working together on this massive challenge. And I think in this context, it's really important to mention that it was young people, youth organizations, the Fridays for Future movement, school students, young activists. These were all mainly responsible for putting this issue on the agenda. And if we didn't have youth activists, then I doubt that the European Commission would have presented the European Green Deal as their flagship project at the end of last year. However, I think as young people, we're not simply here to highlight what's wrong and put pressure on institutions as outsiders. We have to be included in the political processes that are relevant to tackle the climate crisis. And these are all affairs from financing, as we discussed, to climate and climate-friendly fiscal policy, to biodiversity, conservation, and the whole range of different topics. And one example that I can give of this is when the European Youth Forum co-organised the official pre-meeting of the UNEC Regional Forum for Sustainable Development in 2019, and was planning to, again, bring young people together to Geneva in 2020, before the news of the lockdown came in. And I think these are the types of initiatives that need to be encouraged by all stakeholders, to have young people directly on the table to ensure that we have that meaningful youth participation in those processes. And young people have shown time and time again that they're standing ready for action. It's now on all the other stakeholders who are currently the gatekeepers of political power to make sure that they show they're serious about meaningful youth participation and will take action to make that happen together.
Thank you, Rosalyn. A seat on the table, absolutely. And I think that's essential. And I think that's to the benefit of everybody. And I think I would personally strongly echo this. It's always refreshing to have the youth voice on the table, and also to be part of the design of the solutions and the policies that will ultimately affect the youth in the future. So thank you again for this reminder, absolutely. Now let's move to Durreen. And again, the Asia Pacific. ESCAP has been working with you very closely, Durreen, and with your organization, and has been supporting and working in partnership with you to scale up really the Women Livelihood Bond. What can be done to unleash the power of the private sector to create the transformations and disruptions we need to achieve the 2030 agenda. And I'm speaking here about the positive disruptions that Salma has reminded us about how to go about disruption, which is very useful, needed, but there is some better ways to do it, some others. Durreen, up to you.
Right. Thank you, Omar. IX has been very proud to work with UNSCAP. They have been a wonderful partner, and the funding from the Canadian government enabled that, so we're very grateful for that, on our Women's Livelihood Bond series. And UNSCAP played a critical role in supporting and de-risking the innovative financial instrument. And it has been very effective in encouraging the participation of the private sector. Now, this is exactly what we need to see with the UN bodies and the multilaterals do, be effective enablers. And my big request is for these organizations not try to be doing what the private sector is doing, but actually be the enabler and de-risk the financial instruments and support private sector practitioners who know how to do these instruments and bring in innovation in the financial system. Now, with a lot of INGOs, multilaterals, and donors who are coming in and claiming to use finance for SDG and the climate crisis, we have to work hard to make sure that we are not retooling the traditional development approaches and tools and calling it innovative finance. So I think it's very, very important for us to really ensure that we are all doing the right things and the ecosystem players are actually enabling others to do the right things. Now, the question really should be that we should be asking is, are the multilaterals, and I think that's something that we really need to also bring into the equation, are they ready to embrace risk and create actionable solutions? And if so, then we have to really ensure that the UN bodies and the private sector can work with practitioners who have hands-on experience to design inclusive gender and green lens financial instruments. We need to shake up the development model. And I know I'm talking to a group of folks who are in the development space, but we have to really go beyond the top-down, the multilateral approach, and the donor government should also partner directly with the private sector and who can effectively leverage catalytic capital. And as I have the ear and the audience of all of you, I would actually request that you use your influence to make the private sector, the sovereign funds, investors to actually support and buy instruments like the Women's Livelihood Bond, which are actually working directly with the underserved communities and effectively connecting the backstreet of the underserved communities to the Wall Streets of the world. And that's the only way we can actually meet the SDG goals, which are now completely off the chart, with the pandemic. So there is a solution, but we need to just be able to embrace it.
Thank you, Durreen. Thank you. Again, great messages, complementarity, not duplication. The important role of multilateral is to really leverage is, if you wish, its positive influence on the right directions and in reshaping the policies, including in the financial retargeting, if you wish, of investments and so on. I think these are, again, critical messages. And embracing risks. We all embrace risks in our life. So I think even the financial system has to embrace a little bit in the financial instruments, some of that as well. So thank you very much, Doreen, for these messages. Let me turn now to Salma. Salma, we spoke about, obviously, we cannot, we are living in the COVID-19 context. And it presented us and imposed on us new realities. It tested the resilience of institutions and the societies. Now, can you tell us how were organizations such as yours able to continue supporting women in this crisis? And what do you think are the most pressing steps going forward to ensure that women and girls do not suffer the setbacks brought about by this crisis? They are already, many of you have said, kind of suffering from the brunt even before the of inequality and the lack of inclusiveness before the COVID-19. How can we ensure that this does not continue and does not even exacerbate? Salma, up to you.
As all over the world, we know that women have been unequally impacted by this. We know that violence against women exacerbated. We know that even the education of women has been affected, especially poor women and women from traditional communities in Jordan, for example, because they did not have laptops, and some of them, their parents or brothers did not want them to be online. Because that meant that they're going on social media. So imagine in a country where we've closed the gender gap in education, we need to come back and rethink how we took education for granted even for women. I will talk about 4 quick points. We need to focus specifically on removing the technological barrier. This is relating to the ability of women to work from home. This is relating to ability to access education from home. And it's relating to opportunities that have been raised where we were able to reach women from local communities, harness their knowledge. So we have to look at that, how the technology has allowed us to reach everyone and not leave anyone behind. But we need to remove the barrier to ensure that. The care economy. The need for care economy is increasing, although because we know, not only because this is a right for the children, but also the care economy is mostly owned by women, and it has been affected during the lockdown because mostly nurseries and kindergartens were closed, and these are owned by women. So this brings me to the next point, which Durreen has mentioned, which is financial inclusiveness. $500 million package was offered by the government for small and medium enterprises. We don't know how many of those were owned by women in Jordan. We don't have the data, we don't have the numbers, and information coming from them is saying they were unable to get them. And not only that, some of them, they don't want to get them because of the inequalities within the system that might make them unable to pay back and puts them in more debt. So we need to look again into the issue of financial inclusion and to look at the issue of data again. Without data, we will continue to, in every crisis, to see that women are the mostly affected, the most vulnerable women to be mostly affected. Migrant women, refugee women in Jordan were the most who fell outside the safety networks in a situation of crisis. So we need to plan for crisis in a better way now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Salma, again, for these messages and for reminding us that, of course, many regions, and including in the Arab regions, women achieved great progress in the education aspects. But you reminded us that this has also to be linked and kind of conveyed to the economic empowerment and to the financial inclusion. They don't translate automatically to economic empowerment or financial inclusion to women just because you are sometimes better educated than men. Which is the case in many of the Arab regions and in the case in many countries, including Latin America and the Caribbean as well. So thank you for reminding us. And again, data comes again and again. And I think this is key to address this issue. You also raised the issue of the digital divide in a way, and the need to address this digital divide to ensure that it's going also and it empowers women and others who don't have access. We're all having now virtually this panel, but we all have access to an internet, which is not the case for many in the regions in which you are. And I think this is key also if we are to move forward from a great lesson from this crisis as well. So let me go now to Latin America and the Caribbean and to Philipp again. Here, let me change a little bit the focus and maybe move a little bit to a macro aspect of the crisis and the focus. And this is the issue of the middle-income countries, which represent most of the Latin American and the Caribbean countries. And Durreen spoke about the multilateral solutions and so on, which really kind of left out a little bit so far at this stage many of the middle-income countries. Now, Philipp, from your perspective, what key actions that the region, the Latin American and the Caribbean middle-income countries can take to promote an inclusive recovery post-pandemic and achieve the SDGs in this beginning of the decade of action?
Thank you, Ambre. I believe the first thing that we need to do is to build on what already exists. We have multilateral bodies around our region, starting with the regional commissions and the agencies, funds and programs that already has a wealth of knowledge that they have worked with the different countries and the different stakeholders. So I believe we need to first start building on what already exists. I hear about reshaping a lot and revamping a lot of things that are actually already in place and that we need to trigger, much more than to redefine completely. I believe, first of all, we need geocoded COVID financial flow data sets. That's something important to know. We are always hearing how much money it's going in recovery plans, but we never see how that is really allocated, to whom it is allocated, and who's actually helping governments to shape and parliamentarians to shape, and that's an actor that I will not be missing here. We do need to see how we work with parliaments who are allocating new resources and have to take decisions based on the data that we can provide. The second thing is, I believe we need to create, in this case, it's really a creation, building on the statistics that exist, on data catalogs with spatial temporal detail. I believe we need real-time data in order to push forward and to have knowledge hubs that are being created in order to enable analytics for Latin America and the Caribbean specifically, that has a disintegration of this data. We are the middle class of the world. We are lagging behind already on the 2020 targets of the SDGs. So let's keep the focus on what we were doing. And I believe that's something very important to have in mind for our region, because we are recognized. But I was really finishing, Amre and colleagues, about how organizations in Latin America and the Global South are recognized for the capacity to implement. But I believe that few of our organizations are viewed as experts of generating and sharing really breakthrough learnings on how guidance can be translated into effective policies on the ground. So I believe we need that focus very much on the action-orientated focus in order to build forward much stronger. So I hope my message got through in English, Spanish, on everything that I have tried now with the communication. You were saying that we are lucky that we have internet connection. Amre, you are right, but right now the Colombian internet hasn't worked that well. So I hope you have heard me loud and clear, and over to you again.
Thank you, Philipp. And we heard you and your message. I mean, even if it is a little bit on and off because of the digital and the internet challenges sometimes, I think it went through loud and clear. And I think I'm really glad that you also brought at the end of the discussion an important issue about the accountability and transparency. And that brings us to the issue of the good governance again, all right? And also your role as civil society and also of all multi-stakeholders. This is key by also ensuring the accountability and transparency to the governments, but also in reaching the most vulnerable population all over in the regions and in the world. And again, you reminded us for the critical role and what we can do as multilateral organization, including the regional commissions. And I'm glad that we are, as regional commissions, hosting this panel to exactly benefit and share these critical views of yours as critical stakeholders. And we will continue to do that and to continue to engage with you in a positive manner. Thank you all for really joining this panel and for the wealth of messages that we all heard, which I'm not going to try to wrap up because I think they speak for themselves. Thank you all for this, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.